Okay, there we go. We are live now. Hello, Park Slope Together. We're here. I'm Sony, and I'm joined by...
Christy.
Oh, you're above. When I do this, you're above me. Are you also above me on your screen? Oh, well, okay, Christy's up, and Justin's here. We are on today with council candidate Justin Krebs. Justin is the director of campaigns for the liberal activist group Move On. Using the online operations of that group, he has mobilized people for causes that include keeping Obamacare and fighting against family separation in border detention facilities. He is co-founder of The Tank, which is a nonprofit theater for emerging artists. He is married to Casey, who is a midwife, and he is the proud father of 3 very engaging children, which includes a 3rd grader and twin 1st graders. And I should tell you, in full disclosure, I actually know Justin. We interact together at PS39, where our children go to school, and we have served on the PTA together in that capacity. And we are also volunteers at the Camp Friendship Food Pantry, and Justin has used his skill set to mobilize our volunteers, and he also comes to our food pantry with his girls to help us get food out to people. So if this feels a little familiar, part of that is going to be because I know Justin. But anyway, welcome, Justin. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Sony and Christy and Sylvia, who we can't see now, but we saw a moment ago. And I know that this is now your 5th hour of candidate interviews, and I really appreciate that it takes time to prep it, to promote it, to be thoughtful about it, to do it, to relive it. So thanks for spending so much time with us.
Laptop democracy in action. You gotta love it. We bring it to the people is what we do around here. So Justin, there was something that you said elsewhere in another interview where you were talking about the levers of government power, and you were saying it was up to us to make them work. And I thought that was very interesting considering your background, and you were sort of teeing that up as part of your what is making you run for office. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely, Sony. And I'll just start by both thanking folks for tuning in and also saying, yes, I am on the street. There will be a little background noise. In part, I love our neighborhood. Many of you have seen me. I often like to work outside and be outside. So I thought it'd be fitting for Park Slope Together to be outside. I'm outside Postmark, which is a great cafe. They are shuttered now, but I still have my coffee that I ordered when I arrived here. And so there will be a little traffic sounds now and then, and that's life in the city. So when I think about government, you know, there's this famous Ronald Reagan quote, the scariest words you could hear are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And that defined conservatism for decades. And I just really see a view of progressive governance and a core to the liberal and progressive values that I embrace. That's the opposite. Government is not them. Government needs to, at its best, be the tool for all of us. It is one of the ways we can pool our common resources to pursue the common good for a shared agenda, for whether it's public space, public schools, clean air, clean water. On a national level, it's things like healthcare. On a city level, it's things like how we use our space, our streets, our housing, because the government is a tool that we, the people, need to use. There are plenty of other ways that we pool together our social capital. Park Slope Together is a great example. Block associations, like the one that Sylvia and Christy were describing in our waiting room beforehand, is another example. And a lot of the work I've done over time has been about how do you create and foster and empower social capital, which is kind of a wonky term, but I love it. And I think it actually defines a lot of what we do here. And that's all the ways strangers become neighbors and neighbors become friends, and we help each other as those soft bonds. Now let's actually bring those to the levers of government and imagine that government actually has a role to empower us and empower our communities, to be responsive to us in our communities. And there are certain things that we're not going to be able to do on a block association level. I love that Sony and I and so many other folks in Park Slope Together are involved in the Camp Friendship Food Pantry, which was actually germinated by Chris Johnson posting on Park Slope Together, we're going to start a food pantry, who wants to come? the collective energy of dozens and dozens, I mean, 50, 60 volunteers every week, hundreds of folks we serve, drivers that go out twice a week has been incredible. But let's make no mistake, a food pantry, as incredible as the volunteer outpouring is a band-aid when in fact our society should be thinking about food security in a more serious and thoughtful way. And so I often see, like, I want to create things through community, and then I want us to take that next step. We're able to build social capital together. We're able to volunteer together. How do we actually grab the tools of government? It's work that I've done with Move On. It's work that I've done here locally and on the state level. And now I'm looking for the chance to, instead of cajole, push, pressure elected officials, to be the elected official that actually can work with allies and community groups on turning these levers over to all of us. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Christy, you had a follow, I think.
Yeah, Justin, just to follow up on that idea of community that you're talking about, how do you envision keeping the community engaged with your work and keeping us informed about what's going on, on that local level? I think a lot of us are tuned into, national politics a little bit more than our community, although our energy is probably better spent locally. So how do you envision community outreach around such a large constituency?
Well, you know how the mayor goes on Brian Lehrer every Friday. Clearly, every Friday, Christy and Sony, 9 a.m.
Right.
Hey, we're where it's at, man.
It's a great question, and I think what you're identifying about the difference between people being engaged in national and local politics is real. I've been knocking on doors and calling voters every day. Christy knows that I actually called her cold last week, not realizing it was the same Christy. And I hear a lot of folks say, "I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from the 2020 election." People were tuned in, they were fired up, they were engaged. The stakes were incredibly high. It was work that I was doing at Move On, so I was there with you. And we're now kind of still in the hangover of 2020. People don't want to actually, they don't want to think about it anymore. And you're right that we have to find ways of engaging folks locally. And not only is it, I'm not gonna say whether it's more or less important, but it affects your life in very immediate ways. When you ask somebody what political issue they care about, they sometimes get tongue-tied. When you ask somebody what would make their neighborhood better, what would make their school better, what would make their daily commute better, they have a lot to say. They say it on the pages of Park Slope Together all the time. So one is, how do you make sure that you're talking to folks about things that are relevant to them, that are taking it out of the abstract, making it quality of life, nuts and bolts. Here's how government can be responsive to you. Two, making sure you meet people where they're at. So yes, you need to have an office. In fact, you should have several offices and mobile offices and outposts around the district that are linguistically accessible, culturally accessible, hours that are accessible. If your office is only open 9 to 5, there are a whole lot of people who are never going to get to come see you. I'm not saying the library's hours are perfect, especially right now, but the fact that they have those staggered hours to have evenings and have mornings to work with different, that's, an office needs to do the same, but you can't just expect people to come to an office. You need to go out and reach them where they are. And that means using some of the tools that we use at Move On. There's a lot of digital listening tools we use to make sure we're hearing folks in a lot of different ways. But also those digital tools are only technological advances on what is the basics of this, organizing constituent services. So when I want to hear what's going on with local businesses, I don't speculate on it. I talk to local business owners. When I want to hear what's happening at schools, I don't guess. I talk to parent leaders I can access, and through them, more parents or parent coordinators or administrators. And that level of very proactive outreach would need to be part of how an office can stay in touch with folks, listen to folks, but also keep promoting out and communicating what work we're doing and how it's actually relevant to your commute, your work, your job, the amount of dog poop on your street. I mean, believe me, I get asked a lot about that. The questions I get asked are probably pretty similar to some of the topics that you all hear a lot about. And so I'd be looking forward to that kind of proactive listening and engagement, and really using a network of community volunteers to help do it as well. And that was a PS39 parent who just walked by and waved at us.
I love this on the street thing at Postmark Cafe. That's great. We should demand that of all of our candidates. So just to piggyback on how this could work, the outreach and all of that stuff. One of the questions that we ask regularly which is one of the questions that I like the most because it is a very concrete example of what a council person will actually do in our district and how they would approach it. And that question is this, talking about the Gowanus, that decision will probably be made for you, right? Like assuming that the ULURP process continues without challenge, it will probably be made. So it will fall to you to then be the guardian of whatever the agreement has been. So how do you anticipate championing the causes that aren't as, that don't have as much oversight baked into our levers of affordable housing? What do you see as the issues that you're going to really have to keep an eye on? And then how are you going to do that if we have a council or a mayor who has to put our resources in a million directions? How are you going to make sure that the resources show up where our community has decided that they should?
Thanks, Sony. So on Gowanus rezoning in particular, and then we can expand from that kind of conceptually, I think incredible work has been done by the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. They are a coalition that has a lot of unusual stakeholders together. Not that individually they're unusual, but the bedfellows of them. So you have Gowanus Canal Conservancy and NYCHA residents and Park Slope Civic Council and Arts Gowanus. You have folks who focus on affordable housing, folks who focus on industrial manufacturing. You have a lot of folks together saying, here's what we need. Here are deal breakers we have, including deal breakers around local community governance. Now, it's one thing, as in this kind of implicit in your question, it's one thing to get a commitment and it's another thing to live up to it. But I think that part of what any council member needs to do is say, how do we keep that table together, that group together, and ideally bring more folks to it, including folks who oppose the rezoning strongly and who have a stake in the game. Just because you disagree with somebody or just because the policy changes doesn't mean that they get written out of it. In fact, you need to hold them close as well. And believe me, I meet with folks who want more housing faster, and I meet with folks who want less development, and I'm talking to folks on all sides of the issue. And one would have to continue to do that. The Gowanus rezoning is not going to happen yes or no like a light switch. It has already been the work of generations. The work of Gowanus Canal, the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice has been the work of many years, and the work moving forward is generational work to make this a thriving and affordable and mixed use and sustainable and resilient neighborhood. So you have to pay a lot of attention. So one, you have to pay attention to it. Practically speaking, you need in your office somebody who knows that their job is being in touch with all of those groups, the ones that are sitting at the table, the ones that might not feel like they have a place at the table, and bring them in. Larger than that is this question of not just how do you keep Gowanus on track, but how do you overall bring attention to issues? And I think it speaks to something that I like about this role of city council. I see city council as having two main buckets of work. That's two smaller buckets as well that I'm happy to talk about as well, but I'll focus on the two main ones. And I think Brad Lander has largely shown he's able to use both of these well. Whether or not you agree with him on everything, and I think he's been a great council member and a lot of issues, a real champion. I think he uses two buckets well. One is you have the specific defined set of responsibilities as a city council member. You can pass legislation. When Brad got in and folks who are like us, who were independent progressives at the time, helped elect the first members that formed the Progressive Caucus, they got paid sick leave passed. That was legislation. More recently, workers' rights legislation, reckless driving legislation. He actually has thought about legislation. So you have legislation, you have budget oversight, where you can use your vote. You're only one of 51, but your vote to how you use budget. And you have the oversight tools, the committees that you sit on that not only pass measures, but actually can haul folks in front of them. So those are these defined roles of city council, and all of them play into this question. But then there's a second bucket. You have to remember you are one of 51 city council members. So that's less than 2%. That is it's small. Be humble about that. And then be creative and be strategic and say, if I'm going to get anything done, I need to have a real theory of change, which is a phrase that a lot of progressive organizers use, something that we talk about at Move On a lot. It's not enough to care about an issue. What's your theory of change to move that issue? Who are the targets you need to move? What are the resources you have to move those targets? And that's how I think about some of the issues facing city council. And I think Brad has done this very well. And the two examples I'll give on middle school integration in District 15, which I'm very much in support of and think is we need to strengthen and shore up and use as a model to think about how to expand elsewhere. He didn't take a vote on that, but he was associated with it by following in the footsteps of parent leaders, a diverse set of parent leaders, and bringing attention to it. He helped use his platform to raise an issue, to shine a spotlight on it. Similarly, with a lot of safe streets issues. Some, like reckless driving, it was a vote with legislation. A lot of things were being willing to partner with the DOT, being willing to draw attention, work with Families for Safe Streets, work with transportation alternatives, work with the Riders Alliance. And in both of those cases, he became a leader on something by figuring out how do we draw attention to it. Who are the allies you need to make in the community? Who are the allies you need to make around city council? His work with Jumaane Williams on stop and frisk reform was a terrific partnership. And so that's how I would approach these issues. With my campaigner hat on, with my organizer hat on, how do you make sure you're building the coalition around the city? How do you make sure you're earning media, driving attention, work with the campaigners, the advocates to do what we do at Move On a regular basis, like make things that are visible and make things that are memorable to keep attention on this issue. And I would definitely bring that second bucket of work or second kind of channel of work into my work in city council.
Let's talk, while we're on the topic of Gowanus, just expanding into the actual build and what's being proposed there, and using that as your model for, like, help me understand what your model for affordable housing would be as you look at the Gowanus. Like, when you see it, I know that we've talked in passing about it, and we've talked about how nuanced it is, but we haven't really gotten into, well, what's the nuance that you're seeing, you know? So tell me a little bit about what the Gowanus rebuild looks like to you, the proposal on the table, and is it the kind of thing that you're like, this is what we should model future building on, or do you see affordable housing being provided in a different mechanism?
In an ideal world, and in the world we can build towards over time, we would be doing massive investments of public funds in building housing, full stop. That would look like social housing and public land trusts on the scale of the Mitchell-Lamas. There are examples of this in New York history and American history, and sadly over the years, the federal government, which has to be a player in this, along with state and city, has been largely out of that game. I think that there is need for that, in addition to the way Section 8 can work, in addition to the way rent control and rent stabilization provides affordable housing, in addition to the way tenants' rights. All of these are pieces, but ultimately we should be building more in public infrastructure, public money, a public bank of New York. These are all pieces of that infrastructure. And I don't want to wait until those things happen. I think we can, the same way that you brought up Move On's experience fighting for the Affordable Care Act, the same way that we need to, at the same time, push for Medicare for all while we preserve the Affordable Care Act and stop Trump care and the repeal, which is what we spent much of 2017 doing. But you have to have that North Star. I want the North Star of the massive investment in public housing and in social housing and new development. And at the same time, I want to make sure that we're building housing now that is more deeply affordable than it has been in the past, that is more of a mixed part of any mixed use facility, that it's not segregated out, that it is happening in more affluent neighborhoods like ours, where it can, and that's why Gowanus is a good example of it. That it's happening thoughtfully and intentionally with good design, and that it's happening in this case as the result of that it's meeting the needs and the demands shaped by the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. So that it's not a developer coming, offering money, and then saying, take it or leave it, which is a lot like ransom. It's actually neighborhood groups setting the table, and then the developers come in. So in this case, there will be private developers in it. I would rather them be non-for-profit developers where we can, and I'd rather it be ultimately public funds working closely with nonprofit developers who have experience with this, as most of the way we do it. Two more notes on that. One is that also comprehensive citywide planning is a piece of that. So I have a friend who I remember 15 years ago saying to me, the reason he hated politics is that people needed to have yes, no answers on very immediate questions. Not hated, frustrated. Everything was about the immediate thing in front of you. And he said, over the next 15 years, 1 million people are going to move to New York. Where are they going to live? That's not a yes, no, this year question. That's like a thoughtful, engaged policy question. That kind of question stays in my mind. Our city is going to keep growing and we want it to keep growing. And every time you create a single small piece of rezoning and find ways of pitting different community interests against each other, developers will often win. But if you can have a comprehensive city plan, that's not just about housing, but it's about environmental infrastructure. That's about climate. That's about school seats we need. That's about transit. That's the kind of model that I would want to see. And then I'd want to see it locally involve groups like the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice that bring a lot of folks together. So those are some of the pieces that I would see moving forward. And ultimately that I don't want to see is private proposals. I don't want to see private developers developing as of right, which happens outside of more comprehensive rezoning. I'd also say last thought on this is that it's true for both housing, but I also want to like the same question applies to like climate as like, how do we think about our climate and our resiliency in the city? These are also things that need both big planning and that at a district level, we can be doing more and more of. And it's why on my website, I have both kind of confusingly, both a citywide climate agenda and a District 39 climate agenda. Because I think there are things that we can be doing locally that move the ball forward around composting, around going big on kind of reuse, mutual aid, on cleaning up the Gowanus, on solar. There are things and on pedestrian first zones, so that there's both a need for big comprehensive planning and the citywide push that you're going to have to get them, depending on the mayor, and organize the city council around. And then there are things that you can also start doing in the district on climate, on housing, that I want to make sure we're moving forward.
Before we leave the housing issue for climate, I just want to ask, like, when it comes to like housing vouchers, increasing the amount that a voucher can carry would be a useful thing for an immediate relief to some extent. How do you support that kind of a thing for an immediate relief, or what would you do in the short term as you're thinking ahead for the long?
Yes to increasing Section 8, yes to making sure that landlords who are required to take vouchers are actually required to take vouchers. So some of it is that there are already rights and programs for tenants that are not always enforced, that are not always known. Some of this also has to be keeping folks in homes when they're able to be in homes. And so making sure that tenants have the right to counsel and understand that right, making sure that tenants aren't intimidated by a landlord who, and again, not all landlords are bad actors. There are plenty of good landlords too. But if a landlord is trying to evict folks or trying to move folks out of rent controlled or rent stabilized apartments and is backed by lawyers and legalistically written letters that are very intimidating, a lot of renters don't know what their rights are. So it's expanding those rights or educating around those rights, expanding the rights to counsel, keeping folks in terms of helping them move into housing. Yes to higher Section 8, but I also think, and this is now like sort of midterm, I think there's some really interesting proposals that I know folks on the state level are more focused on in terms of turning office buildings and hotels that are not going to be used, that are not coming back in the same way, into more housing and actually repopulating parts of the district. I'm in favor of very creative solutions like that, even while you also look for narrower solutions that allow for more density within a particular apartment buildings, like basement apartments, bring those out of the shadows and legalizing them. So I think that there are a lot of creative solutions that are very short term, or a handful that are very short term, some that are midterm, as you're working towards the longer vision of how we change housing and viewing housing ultimately as a human right, the same that we should as healthcare.
Thanks, Justin. Christy, we got anything else on housing to ask? So moving into climate, pollen is giving me such a hard time today.
Same.
All of like my eyes are so itchy and everything. So let's see. So into climate. So one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, you were talking about solar paneling and using that creating a network in infrastructure for local areas, so people who couldn't have solar could still tap into the solar power of their neighbors and their community. So talk to me a little bit about that, and talk to me about how you would make that happen, given that it hasn't really quite taken off yet.
So about 7 or 8 years ago, our building, I live in a 10-unit co-op, explored solar. And it didn't add up for us. The numbers weren't quite right. There were concerns about the infrastructure. Technology is moving so fast that I bet if we looked at it now, which we haven't done because we're all busy and it's been a pandemic. I don't know if you know, a lot's been going on this year, but I actually bet the costs have come down, the efficiency has gone up, and actually the yield would probably make financial sense for our co-op. And we're a co-op that already thought about it with you know, a handful of very handy and involved members of the co-op, and yet we haven't done it. So it's a sign that other folks aren't even necessarily thinking about it or tuned into it or have heard anecdotally, oh, it doesn't quite work. But the fact is, solar is already actually taking off in many places. The both nonprofits and for-profits that do installation, that create essentially a public option of solar, that have a real detailed understanding. Sorry, I'm like glancing up because I'm looking at roofs around me to see if they're the right examples of them. They're District 39 based groups that are already doing exceptional work and leading the way on solar. And I want to supercharge that. I want to actually make sure that a co-op like mine and buildings like so many other folks know what the options are, know what the costs are, know how to do it. I want there to both be financial incentives on the citywide level, but even short of that, let's put our social capital, again, let's put our volunteer infrastructure into literally door-to-door or cold calling canvassing, telling people about solar, not from the for-profit firm where it's necessarily a salesperson, though they do some of that also, but making sure that we're actually telling our neighbors, telling building owners, telling folks who have the right kind of roofs for it, what their options are. And one of the best advocates for it are people who have already done it, who have already gotten it, are now saving from it, have seen how it worked. Oh, it wasn't that invasive. Oh, it wasn't that scary. These guys made it work. So I think some of it is putting the platform, the office muscle of this role behind literally canvassing and educational opportunities to promote solar and make it more and increasingly a norm and an understood acceptance. Even the fact that, you know, my building will have a memory that it wasn't that easy. And Sonia, you said it's not quite taking off. And I bet there are other people watching right now who are probably saying, actually, it's taking off. Actually, we did it last year, and here's how much we saved, or here's how much we'll save over the next 10 years. Like, let's make sure the advocate that you know, and anytime there's something in a neighborhood, you need the neighborhood cheerleaders for it. Everyone's like, oh my God, that the people selling the pasta off of the Union, their stoop on Union Street, they're great. We need that for solar. We need like the neighborhood busybodies, which I say in the most beloved ways, the mavens, let's call them the mavens, talking about how good solar is. And let's find that and cheerlead and advocate for it and then actually make it work. And if there are buildings where financially it doesn't work for, let's figure out what the city does to actually make the financial work out better. And I also have heard from some folks, somebody who came to the JJ Byrne, the Park Slope Civic Council forum the other night, came to me afterwards and said, you know, I love that you talk about solar. Here's the regulatory challenges that have made it difficult to put onto our building. And I was like, we need to hear that. So we actually figure out how to break through that, because you have somebody who has a big flat roof, wanted solar, and there was some obstacle he was hitting. So we need to become smarter about that to move through too. But solar is part of it. And again, this all falls into what I call my District 39 climate plan, because we need a citywide climate plan. And our city has done some great work. We need to continue to be a leader. The world is on fire, and New York City needs to do its share and is doing its share. So let's go to the next generation of the Climate Mobilization Act and a Green New Deal for New York City. Let's get our fleet off of fossil fuels, including our school buses. There's plenty New York City can do. And that will depend on who the mayor is and how you, federal funding and state regulation, a lot of issues. But there's stuff we can do locally in our district that comes from a council member willing to put a little bit of money, a little bit of muscle, a little bit of community organizing, and work with community groups that are already doing a lot of this work on solar, on pedestrian first zones, on reducing waste, on composting, on big reuse. And that's all part of this climate plan that's I've been writing about, and that's on my website, and I'm excited that it's sort of, you know, shovel ready is the phrase, right? that some people once used. I don't know, they used it in like the Obama era. But that's the kind of image that I have. If there's work we could start doing immediately.
Shovel ready is an elegant phrase. Christy, I think you've got something.
Yeah, Michael, who's watching us on Facebook, just shared that his building is installing solar this coming month. It's 70% subsidized. It's a great deal and everyone should do it. So does he mean subsidized by the city, or what is the subsidy? Where does the subsidy come from solar?
Michael, if you're watching right now, why don't you answer in Facebook? I mean, there are different federal, state, and maybe local programs. I need to understand a little bit more that apply to different buildings, different sizes. And I'm sure on the federal level, that's also changed and is changing back, right? Like depending on who the administration is, it does feel like this will be a good set of years for solar. So hopefully that will spark conversation, not only in this thread on Park Slope Together, but a fresh thread where people are like, solar, good, bad, and exciting. Share your reactions now, and we can all learn from each other about it. And that's the kind of, I mean, that's what you've created. And obviously Park Slope Together came about in response to the pandemic at a time where people needed community, needed to share information, needed a sense of connection. I'm excited for some of what got created in a pandemic to now exist outside of the moment of the acute crisis. There are other crises that we still face. There's no shortage of problems, but actually to be able to take a breath and say, now as a community, here's information we can trade, here's social capital we can build, here's progress we can make together, where we're not in the midst of the fire, is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to Park Slope Together continuing to do that. Yeah,
Michael says it's federal, state, and local subsidies. So Michael is one of the solar mavens we're looking for.
There you go. Okay, if anyone wants to really, create your shirt now, Solar Maven. Whoever walks around wearing a Solar Maven shirt, you've now signaled to anyone who passes you on the street. It's essentially saying, stop me to talk about solar, which would also be a pretty good shirt. Someone should just start, stop me to talk about, it's a little long for a shirt. We'll figure it out.
Michael, I think you've just been recruited to work on Justin's solar campaign. You're welcome.
Talk solar to me. That's what a shirt could say.
You know, it's funny that you say that actually about solar before we get off this topic and on to another. We redid our place also about 10 years ago. Oh. And at that time we did explore solar. And I think the reason why I said it wasn't taking off is because a number of people on our block have done upgrades or pretty substantial renos before they moved in. And some of our neighbors do have solar, but a lot of them don't. And at the time that we were looking at it, it's like you said, the numbers didn't quite line up, and our roof is a flat roof, so it requires a certain amount of infrastructure to put it up there that we just could not accomplish. So,
and honestly, I don't want to just be all sunshine and roses about it. Let's find out why it doesn't work in some places. Let's find out who's had those that's the only way you're going to learn from it. I'll say the other thing this reminds me of, though, is the way folks talked about compost 7-8 years ago. So when composting, well, remember composting we were like in the pilot zone, right? So some people got it automatically, and some people you had to ask to be part of the system. So our building, because of the size we had to ask to be part of it. And I came to the co-op meeting and I said, okay, I talked to organics. They said I have to get everyone to sign on, or 70% of the building. And there was hesitation in the building, right? It's going to be different. And there's like a concern, will this actually make our garbage area dirtier? Or will it be worse for the rats? Because the rats will know where to get the food. Well, actually, for those who are composters, you know that it's the opposite. The brown sturdy bins are so sturdy, the rats don't get into them. And by pulling your food waste out of the cheap plastic bags, the rats are less likely to get it. Well, over time, our building became composting mavens and talk compost to me. So much so that when composting was discontinued last year, folks in my building said, Justin, you're involved in politics. What do we need to get composting back? And I just think of that in similar ways to solar. Obviously, solar takes a lot more infrastructure for the building, but it's about creating norms around things. It's about creating that sense of everyone, peer pressure. Everyone's doing it. The community's behind this. I'm seeing my neighbors did it. Why can't I do it? And I think that that has worked and can continue to work for composting as we bring it back and expand it and go the way that recycling has gone, where it actually is citywide. I think we'll see it for solar. I also actually think it works with a lot of street design innovations. You know, a bike lane used to be a very, very, very controversial thing, as you recall, from Prospect Park West. And then once you get through it, once you get it, people get it and they can imagine it, they can see it. Then you start getting a lot of other communities saying, wait a second, why don't we have that bike lane? You know, city bike is controversial in their places, but they have other people say, wait, I don't want it in my district. So sometimes being willing to imagine the next thing and promote it and advocate for it, and then work together to create that that sense of what's possible will create more momentum and more excitement to expand what's possible, because people will start to imagine it together and then want to create it together.
Let us leave solar for a second and composting,
And
which I know is,
compost.
which is near and dear to our page's heart. You know, so we're gonna go on to schools, another issue,
Great.
very popular here in our neighborhood. Let's talk a little bit about equity. I know that you, along with Lander, did a survey. Tell us a little bit about that survey that you did and what you found, what your takeaway conclusion was.
Great. So to step back, schools are the first, last, and most frequent thing I've talked about in this election. As Sony mentioned, I have 3 kids who go to PS 39, but I'm also involved in the District 15. Most folks on this call will know, but District 15 is the school district that overlaps with City Council District 39. I'm on the leadership of the President's Council, which works to support parents, leaders across the district. And prioritizing, resourcing, integrating our schools has been one of the topics that I would have been most focused on this campaign, even pre-pandemic. And all of that became sharper during the pandemic, including the desire and the need to get our kids back to school in a safe and equitable way as soon as possible. And during the course of this year, I helped organize on behalf of an additional opt-in period, which for remote-only students, which wasn't going to affect my kids. We've been hybrid all year, but I saw families go into this year saying, I'm going to start remote and I want to come back, and then the opt-in period changed. We helped organize around that and get that changed. I helped organize around changes around the 2-case closure rule. Basically, I've been trying to stay in the conversation on how do we keep, at moments we can, giving more opportunities for people to come back into schools. And my kids now go 5 days a week, which is incredible for them. And it's just not true for 60 to 65% of the kids around the city. Many of whom families have chosen remote for this year. And some of whom, like my nephew, who's my sister-in-law wants him to go back to school 5 days a week, and the school's not able to accommodate it because of space. So let's not pretend that everyone who wants to go 5 days a week is able to go right now, because that's not the case. And let's also understand that a lot of folks have chosen not to go back for a variety of reasons. Okay, so with that in mind, since February, I've been sounding the alarm. If we don't have a plan to get us back in the fall, full-time, in-person, 5-day a week, that can be smooth and equitable and successful. If we don't have that plan now, we're not going to go back to the fall. If we're waiting until June 25th, the last day of the school year, to understand what next year will look like, it'll be chaos like last summer was, and we won't be able to open on September 13th, the first day. And that terrified me. So I've been writing about this in the Daily News and elsewhere, most recently in Gotham Gazette, and been organizing around this call on how do we make sure that there's a real plan for school to reopen the fall. One of the things that became clear over the last month was that as my kids were getting the chance to go back to school and some schools were opening up, a lot of public discourse was speculating about remote-only families. They're remote-only. Are they happy with it? Are they not happy with it? Why are they staying remote? And remote-only families are higher percentage families of color than than the average of the system would be. Understanding the needs and the plans of those families is critical to understanding how fall reopening will work. And honestly, administrators, teachers, families, predominantly families of color, like they all need to be at the table helping envision the plan. But we all anecdotally could say, here are 4 or 5 reasons I think people are staying remote. Let's actually find out. The DOE had not been doing the surveying, or they hadn't been sharing it in a transparent way. And we said as our campaign, we reached out to Brad Lander's team and to work together. Let's actually ask folks. Let's ask remote-only families, what's your plan for the fall? So we didn't just want to do it in District 39 or in School District 15. We actually called families all around the city. We made thousands and thousands of calls because, as you all know from the calls you're getting, sometimes you don't want to pick up the phone. So we had to call 10,000 folks to get the responses we got. But we ended up with a racially and geographically representative grouping of families, small, but a starting point, and learned from them that were remote only, had chosen remote only for this year, that 60% of them were intending to come back in the fall in person. Already, that changed my understanding of the discussion we're having. The significant majority is planning on coming back in the fall. Maybe and they shared all sorts of reasons that they were home now. They were monitoring the health situation. Not every family member had been vaccinated yet. They wanted to, or they had routines and plans that worked for them, or their school wasn't going to be 5 days a week, or they were worried about closures. Like a lot of things that are more specific now than to the fall. About another 20 to 25% was fully undecided, and then about 15% fell out across very unlikely or somewhat unlikely to return. Well, that is still a significant number, but it changes the conversation significantly. The other two things that came out of the survey, one, that over 50% of them had not been asked their fall plans yet. So the city didn't know, the schools didn't know. And two, that many of them would find as the most trusted validator, reaching out to them and inquiring, would be their principal. More than the mayor, more than the chancellor, would be hearing from their principal. And a lot of principals that I heard from felt like they were not yet empowered to have the agency to reach out to families until DOE Central gave clarity. They felt held back. So that's the surveying, I think, was overall interesting. And I'd love to see, DOE is surveying. I'd love to see news sites, surveying more. But obviously the conversation has shifted in the last 2 weeks. Now we know that it's going back full time in the fall. But it was so useful to hear from folks. But the other thing about this is it just models the kind of work I want to do. When there's a problem, look, I opine on it as much as anybody. Let's all opine on it. Let's speculate. But let's actually try to see if we can talk to the folks impacted. And if that means some organizing muscle behind it, some innovative muscle. Actually, Casey, my wife, who Sony mentioned before, Casey had said to me at one point, she's like, could you do a survey asking families? And my first reaction was no, because I'd only end up asking families I knew, and that won't be representative, and that won't be that it. And like, why was I the naysayer? Casey was like, ask families. And then we, as a team, worked together and figured out how could we actually do this at scale citywide. So being innovative, thinking about what's possible, talking to the folks impacted, bringing their voice in the conversation, and doing the thing that a lot of us are thinking, but hasn't actually been done yet, are sort of how I like to approach issues. So that's a longer version on the survey, but how I also think about things and some of the work that I'm excited to keep doing around schools.
So let me ask you this before we move in a different direction. So this always sticks with me. Early on in the pandemic, we had done this article where we were sort of laying out, we did it for the Facebook page, where we were kind of laying out the different options of returning to school, kind of the plans that were out there. This was when Traeger, Jemani Williams were floating, like, let's get all of the pre-literate kids in and phase our way up. And, so anyway, whatever. During that part of the conversation, we reached out to some CEC members from different districts to ask them what they were thinking. And so we talked to somebody who was in Washington Heights, somebody who was in another part of Brooklyn, areas where the schools are very different than what we're seeing here. And so one of the ladies really framed this in terms that I'm like, oh, now I understand. Like, it cerebrally, but you don't really know it. But I think of this all the time, that in our school, we bought these insanely expensive air filters. But we've got schools in our city where they've got lead in their water. Those are two very different points that we're trying to get some middle ground for, so that we can be in the same spot. But those are not the same spot. So when I hear this talk about equity and an equitable start, I cannot erase that knowledge of how different these schools are and how far we have to go, really. So when you look at this and you're talking about equity, like, what does that mean to you? And how do you see bridging that
Yeah.
disparity in just the building? Like, we're not even talking about what's happening in the building. We're just talking about the building itself. How do we get there so that everyone can feel safe and have trust in the DOE with their children?
Yep. You're totally right. If you were at a school that didn't regularly have soap before the pandemic, why would you believe that they would have PPE during the pandemic? If you were at a school that already had a hard time communicating to you in a way that was linguistically or culturally or technologically appropriate for you, our school, we get emails and texts and newsletter, we get it all. And if you're somebody who doesn't have access to that technology, doesn't speak that language, if it's culturally ill fit, why would you then believe you're gonna get the right communication about whether it's safe to go to school the next day or not? So that absolutely was a factor in who was choosing to come back to school and who wasn't in the course of this year. And I know that's not, it's amazing that you actually spoke to CEC members around the city. That's the kind of work that needs to be done. Chalkbeat, I think, does a lot of good work on this when they, literally will go and interview folks around the city and say, tell us about the remote experience. I have leaned heavily on my experience working with the District 15 President's Council, where you work with parent leaders from schools across the district. So you have schools that look more like PS39 in terms of their affluence. And then you also have schools that don't. You have Title I schools, you have schools, District 15 includes Park Slope and Windsor Terrace and Kensington and Sunset Park and Red Hook, and I pointing the different directions from where I'm sitting here. And so hearing from the parents, or parents or assistant principals or parent coordinators that I spoke to saying, certainly at the beginning of the year, our need right now is food security for our families in our school. That's what they're coming to us for. They're not coming to us to solve like iPads and argue over iLearn versus Google Classroom, or schools where the technology was the issue. Like, okay, our kids are remote. The city has provided iPads. There's not necessarily digital literacy on the home front for parents to support, but also there's no internet because we don't have municipal broadbands. And so they were literally raising funds for Wi-Fi hotspots, which they were able to do. So you're right, it looks very, very different in different places. And that has to be at the center of how we reopen. That we can't be reopening back to normal. It's reopening with an eye towards how do we actually do this better to give folks the confidence to come back to their schools. Smaller classrooms, more teachers. How do you make sure there's a nurse? I know there's a promise, but nurse and guidance counselors in schools. How do you make sure there are enrichment programs in schools? Right now, some schools are able to access outdoor space. It's not going to be a surprise to you that that's going to involve either principals that know how to navigate the system really well, or that have a big enough administrative team with enough extra capacity to file the permits, or parents associations that can help provide some materials for the outdoor space. Outdoor space is an amazing thing for learning, especially as folks in the fall are going to come back to crowded classrooms. It cannot be something that is hit or miss depending on if your principal knows how to navigate the system and has time to do so, or if your parents association is able to raise money. Like, there needs to be a baseline of service. And that's even before you get to outdoor schooling. That's making sure that you have teachers in the classroom, that you have safety protocols in place, that you're having appropriate level of technology and enough training to support the technology, and in linguistically appropriate ways to train people on that technology. So all of these be part of it. Now we have new funds coming in, which is incredible, and they should not be, no one should presume they're distributed equally per kid or per school. They should be going to places that have shortage of teachers, that have larger classes, to bring down the class size, to allow more infrastructure in those schools to actually talk to families about their individual needs, to support IEPs. I'm sure one thing that many folks have heard about is that kids who have IEPs, we're not getting their IEPs supported through large part in this. Yes, this is an unprecedented pandemic and we're figuring out how to do things remotely, but you have kids essentially families being pressured out of their IEP status because it's so hard to navigate and fight and to have to sue the system for services that are being guaranteed. So I don't know that answers your question, but that's how I think about it. And I think about it by talking to parent leaders and parent coordinators and assistant principals, and when I can, principals at different schools, so that we don't assume the need that we see in the 3 schools that are closest to us is the same need, or even the same way you talk about needs, or the same way you talk about the role of the school or the trust of the school around the city.
So Sylvia had a question. She actually used to work in schools, so this is a topic that's near and dear to her. She was asking about the desegregation of schools and what specifically can the city council do about it, and what would you champion as a city council member to desegregate them?
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm curious to know more about where you worked in schools, and I'll learn it from you after this, or at a stoop party we both end up
When
at.
you phone her up,
Yeah,
as you do.
when I show up on your stoop on Friday, which is only kind of a joke. So I referenced this before, that I think that what Brad did, my sense, and obviously there are folks who are watching this right now that were deeper in the weeds on this fight as it was going on. But my sense is that the middle school integration plan, which Brad helped and championed and supported and continues to champion, was that second bucket of work that I described about city council. It wasn't the laws you pass or the votes you take, it was the platform you build, the organizational support you give, the way you find a way to partner with community allies and use your spotlight, your platform. And so I think there's some of that. And I think that it is absolutely incumbent upon whoever is the city council member from this district to be up to speed on it, to figure out how to make sure the middle school integration plan is working, continues to work. And largely I hear good things about it, though I also hear, not complaints, but just senses of what could be done better. A middle school parent coordinator who says, it's great. We're getting, though, a lot of kids who speak a language that we didn't speak before, so we need more support on translation. Just like there being things that can be described really concretely. That needs to come from the DOE, but also a city council member can be advocating for that, can look for ways to use sources of funding to help push for that, but also just keep the spotlight on it, keep the conversation going, keep asking the questions, keep making sure we're hearing what the story is, and then being the cheerleader to make sure that 5th grade and 4th grade families, and again, my kids are 3rd grade, 1st grade, so we'll be in the thick of it, are tuned in. Beyond that, I mean, there's both in District 15, there's talk of now how to do some rezoning in one of the sub-districts that tries to build off the same theme, being present for those conversations, pulling the same folks in, making sure that there isn't misunderstandings, like being an active conversationalist, supporting, viewing, shepherding is probably more than actually voting. That said, on the citywide level, I think that whoever comes out of District 39 plays a really interesting and important role in joining in a multiracial coalition around the city of both elected officials and community groups to say, hey, here's what we did in District 15. Here's what worked. Here's what hasn't worked. It also won't necessarily work in every district. Districts look very, very different. But let's take from our lessons and figure out how we tackle integration citywide. I'm a former board member of the New York Civil Liberties Union. I stepped down after a few years when I had to start running for office. And the NYCLU fights segregation around. NYCLU is the New York affiliate of the ACLU, fights segregation in our schools, and actually has issued reports showing that New York schools are among the most segregated in the country. So it's not folks imagining it. It's not folks exaggerating the problem. This is a real issue. So I think steps like the District 15 integration plan are terrific. And we need to use our advocacy power, our allyship to continue to champion it, move it forward. As we look to build a coalition citywide that creates pressure on state and citywide, mayoral and DOE, there are a lot of factors, solutions to keep integrating our schools.
That makes sense.
And Sylvia, you'll tell me where I need to get better on it when I see you on your stoop.
She will.
I'm gonna kick it over to Christine.
Are we shifting gears?
Yep.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about your vision for the NYPD funding there, whether you would outsource certain types of responses to other professionals? What's your vision for how things could improve there?
So again, this is something that is informed by my time with the New York Civil Liberties Union, which has been focusing on how do you transform the police and confront police violence for a long time. My vision is you shrink the NYPD, and you do that by making school safety not an NYPD function. Traffic enforcement, collision in investigations are already shifting. How do you move traffic enforcement out of NYPD? Obviously, a lot of the mayoral candidates are talking about this, and their pilot programs are now being expanded. How do you make sure there are other first responders for mental health 911 calls. Essentially, how do you have police handling fewer responsibilities? How do you have people with guns showing up in fewer places? How do you respond to more concerns and complaints without the presumption of criminalizing folks? And criminalizing folks disproportionately means criminalizing Black and brown people. There's a racial justice orientation to that. There's a economic threat in all this. Police are just really expensive. Also, lawsuits about police misconduct are really expensive. Like, let's get the police doing less. Let's hire people. I'm not saying that therapists should make less than police. Okay, we'll handle the pay equity thing next, but right now they do. It will be cheaper. And Denver has been modeling this now for like the last year. They've been piloting a program like this. They are saving money because they're not criminalizing folks that they have to respond to on 911 calls. The response costs less. You're not putting them into a system that's costly both for the public and costly for the folks who are pushed into the criminal justice system. There are other steps that I'd want to take as well. And these are all also all on my site, so I won't talk forever, but having the city council involved in actually confirming the police commissioner so that it's not an accountability, not a one-to-one mayor to police commissioner, bringing the residency requirements for NYPD officers in line with other public sector unions, making the CCRB recommendations binding. I think there's a lot we can do. And I would keep looking to groups led by folks of color that have worked on police violence to help us lead the way, as well as groups like the New York Civil Liberties Union, and recognize that the police are one part of the larger criminal justice reforms we need. So I want to make sure we're also spending time on folks that are coming out of Rikers, are coming out of incarceration. How do we support and acclimate them back? How do we learn from organizations like the Fortune Society, which does tremendous work and runs a facility called The Castle that helps folks that are coming out of incarceration to find jobs, to get the training they need. There are models that are out there that are really, really good that we need to learn from, that are even beyond the question of police, which is, so just put that in the larger framework. And I could say more. I know we're running down on time, so sorry that I filibustered earlier on schools.
It's a tough topic not to. I've got to get a few things in before we end, and just to piggyback on this topic, I want to ask you about e-bikes, which is quite a topic for us here and is in the works right now. There's going to be a community precinct meeting that I think people are looking for. So if this is an issue that strikes the heart of anyone watching us on Parks Up Together, find that post and you'll be able to tune into that webinar. But the reason that issue is so interesting to me is because it is one of those examples where the thing that we have now is you would call up 311 and they would probably call the police, and that's how that would work. If you were a council person, how would you deal? Is that the way that would best deal with the e-bikes, or is there another alternative?
I mean, don't think I didn't think e-bikes would come up on a Parks Up Together conversation. I mean,
of course,
it's not a crystal ball. So first and foremost, so I spend a lot of time talking about our streets in the campaign, our streets as public spaces. How do you make our streets more pedestrian centric, safer for pedestrians, seniors, strollers? As somebody who had at one time a 2-year-old and 2 newborns, I used to push a stroller with 3 kids tangled up in it at a time. And cyclists. I'm a utilitarian cyclist more than an exercise cyclist. I use it to get around the neighborhood. I've done a project as part of this campaign to bike every street in the district. The district goes 5 miles end to end, but it's 120 miles of streets. And I've biked almost all of them in a project called Bike Every Block in order to really see and feel what every block feels like when you're behind handlebars, not behind a windshield, not just in the feet, but behind handlebars, to think about street safety. So, and I'm a huge fan of the open streets. I've written about that, and actually have more coming out on that as well. So overall, I love talking about our streets, and that means they have to feel safe for everybody. And so the greater threat to pedestrians is still cars. Let's not lose sight of that. And anything we can do to slow down automobile traffic, reduce the need to take cars. So that means having other options that are local to you, good public transit, and options to use bicycles and e-bikes safely as alternatives to cars is going to make our streets safer and safer. And that includes making e-bike parking easier, making e-bikes something that a family could use instead of taking a car around, because families do need to get around places. So that's where my focus is. That said, within that, we need to have a better infrastructure for cyclists in general and for e-bikes. We need more protected lanes. We need clear signage and clear norms and clear enforcement so that e-bikes can be and will be able to follow the same rules that we expect of them. And that they're not in, the more you can slow things down, the more you can differentiate, the more that street design can serve multiple uses, the more you ultimately share the road, the safer it will be for everybody. Obviously, e-bikes should not be on sidewalks. E-bikes should not be going the wrong way down the street. And we shouldn't have to say that, but we do. We know that that's like a real thing. And at the same time, we also want our deliveries. I mean, I'm not talking about people who are, I'm not talking like motorcyclists that are, you know, having fun on empty streets, which are really problematic and do need enforcement. I mean, like, we all want our deliveries, and what we don't want to do is create more confrontations between police and criminalizing largely immigrant delivery workers who are ultimately serving a function that we desperately want them to serve. We actually need to build the infrastructure and the community norms around those infrastructure to support it. There was under a while ago in council, under Christine Quinn, a number of laws that were put forward around commercial delivery cyclists and how to enforce those laws that actually shifted more of the burden onto the employers, which is interesting. Those are out of date. I mean, in many cases, we just see that they're not working, but also they didn't account for the gig economy, where what an employer and an employee is actually very different. So I would love to reopen and revisit those laws with stakeholders from around the city, with the folks representing delivery workers who have done a great job becoming more visible and more organized in recent years, with folks that are representing small businesses and restaurants, many of which rely on, but also kind of hate Seamless and Grubhub because they're taking so much of their share. I mean, there are a lot of folks you can get to say, like, let's try to solve this as you build the infrastructure that ultimately makes it safer and continue the work of reducing needs to have cars and increasing freedom of mobility around the city through alternate forms of transportation.
I think that covers it. But before, so I've got to ask you this question too, and we're ready. So you got to make it super fast.
Okay.
This question, I think, is right in your wheelhouse. What proposals will you put forward to accelerate the recovery for the arts?
Oh, what a great question. Sorry, was there more?
That came from Julie, actually, the famous Julie Barron.
Oh, Julie Barron, great. Okay. I mean, I was delighted to hear it because actually we don't talk about the arts in a lot of these debates. And sadly, the arts is sometimes thought of as a fringe issue. I also used to work in parks advocacy, and we always complain about that. Parks are considered like a fringe. Well, they're not. They're essential to how we operate as a city, and so are the arts. For those who don't know, part of my background is that I come from a theater family. I helped start The Tank, Sony mentioned at the beginning, which for 18 years has presented new work by emerging artists across discipline: theater, dance, comedy, multimedia, poetry, puppetry, in a collaborative, non-cost prohibitive, non-commercial way that has made it possible for artists and creators to present new work and audiences to enjoy new work. It's also where I met my wife, Casey. So the arts are very, very dear to us. Casey was a midwife and a birth educator. As she was going through grad school for nursing, came to The Tank as a way to like continue her artistic side. So The Tank is to thank or to blame for the entire life I have now. I've been endorsed by over 100 artists as part of this campaign and by the League of Independent Theater. And part of the reason why is because I don't see arts as a side benefit. I see arts as central to our life as a city. It's central to our spiritual life, but also the culture of the city, and the economics of the city. The arts are a driver, and you only have the big arts. You only have Broadway and Carnegie Hall if you have off-Broadway and off-Broadway and independent venues. It is an ecosystem that cannot survive without the small, and New York City as an ecosystem, as we have seen over the last year, suffers when the arts are closed. So getting the arts back, so you have to support the artists right now who can't be working, and we're hopefully coming towards the end of it. I would have loved to have seen over the last year artists invited in to a surge program of teaching artist capacity that helped work in every school, which is having all these small cohorts that are having staffing issues. Like, we didn't have the funding or the creativity or the vision at the time. I would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen this sort of WPA style, which the city is now doing a small program. I mean, a nice size program on. I could even do more, city, state, and federal, because it's not a question of how the city can support the arts. It's actually a question of how do we get the arts recovery going in order to support the city? Because until the arts are back, or when the arts are back, you're going to have tourists back. You're going to have folks taking the subways, and that's going to make the subway safer. You're going to have people going to the restaurants, and the bars, and the bodegas, and that's going to get all those jobs back. The arts recovery is so critical. And so making sure that obviously we do it safely, we care for artists now. As we reopen, we make sure that we're helping venues stay in their locations. If they're having rent issues, we cajole, pressure, legislate, regulate whatever we need to do to make sure arts venues are able to hold on to their space, because it's a tough time. We need to make sure that we are marketing with our full source of power, city power, the ability to get folks back into seats. One of the mayoral candidates actually proposed, let's buy tens of thousands of tickets and give it to people. What a great freaking idea. I mean, because first of all, we're all desperate to go, again, once it's safe, if you're vaccinated, let's have some clarity about it. But then you're going on that ticket or subsidize it. So it's $20 tickets, right? Because a lot of people can't afford to go to Broadway. So make it, this is something the Tank always did, make the ticket prices commensurate to go to a movie. A lot of people will pay to go to a lousy movie, but they won't pay to take a risk on lousy theater. But let's get into good theater at the same price. So subsidize those tickets, and now they're spending money on everything else that goes around it, and the money's coming back into the system. So those are some of the ideas. There's also more we need to do on artist healthcare. There's also more we need to do on rights for gig workers. Many artists are gig workers, and there's more that we can do from the how do you support arts organizations, again, around rent, around workforce development dollars, and all of that I'm excited to talk more about. I know that we're beyond time. There's a lot more on the website, and thank you for asking about it.
Well, we definitely love our artists here in the neighborhood, and boy, did my heart sing when we had the 2 weekends ago, just music on every corner. That was amazing. If we could do that kind of thing on the regular in the neighborhood, wouldn't that be spectacular?
Yeah, make open culture permanent.
I'm all for it. Let's do it. Let's move to our final question, which is, if you could only accomplish one thing in a singular 2-year term, which is what everyone is campaigning for now, what would that single thing be?
Okay, I'm going to go into this with the assumption that schools are open in person 5 days a week in the fall. If not, we're in a crisis that would consume, and that people are going back. Working on commercial rent legislation or vacancy tax or some other piece of legislation in that space that gives more ability to small business owners to have continuity and support and be able to build up the small businesses on 5th Avenue and 7th Avenue and all around the district. The number of small businesses that are hurting, not only from the pandemic, but also from the monopolistic practices of Amazon and other online retailers, it's dire. You shouldn't have to be wealthy to start a small business. A lot of small businesses require capital to get started, and a lot of women and people of color don't have access to as much capital for a lot of historical reasons and institutional reasons. And then they're in their space, and suddenly they've made a thriving business that gets kicked out after 2 years. And the Tank has been in this situation where we've been kicked out because someone has doubled our rent. We had paid rent, and we at least doubled our rent, we're gone. Another time, a luxury developer developed housing, kicked us out with no discussion of community benefits. And kept the space empty for 2 years while they were waiting to do it. If there's any financial benefit to landlords, and there's, of course, you'll sometimes have an empty space, and sometimes you're a small landlord and you're desperately trying to fill it. But if you're those bigger landlords and you're getting a tax incentive or write-off for an empty space, let's change the incentive. So I think something in that space between vacancy tax, commercial rent control, programs that force mediation with landlords and tenants would be one thing that I would want to accomplish, assuming our schools are open 5 days a week in person, with in-person teachers.
Justin, thank you so much for joining, having such a fun conversation and seeing our streetscape behind you right there on 6th Street, right at Postmark. If anyone's looking, you could see right over Justin's shoulder there is the community fridge that has been set up. If you have a chance and can make a contribution, go on by, you can drop stuff in the fridge. If you need it, it's there. You can come visit me and Justin anytime on Saturday anytime between 10 and 2. I think we're mostly there. What time do you get there, Justin? Like,
yeah, I usually get there. I'm usually the morning crew, so like sort of 8:30 or 9. But yeah, you can drop anything off at the Camp Frontier Food Pantry, non-perishables and fresh direct bags, both Friday evening, 6:30 to 8, and Saturday from sort of 9:30 to 2, or at the community tables we have set up around the neighborhood. And also I should note that this area of Postmark used to be a parking spot, and now it's, sorry, truck going by, now it's outdoor seating. Outdoor restaurants and outdoor cafes need to be permanent as well.
thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you,
We'll talk
Justin.
to you soon. Everybody,
Thank you.
Parks. Say it again.
I was just going to say thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you.
What a good time. Park Slope Together, we're going to be back here tomorrow night, 5 o'clock. We're going to be with Jessica Simmons, who's got an interesting story to tell us about her candidacy. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. Justin, thank you again so much. Christy, Sylvia, as always, it was a good time. See you all tomorrow, 5 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.